PRT Maker is something that I already mentioned because it was done for that film, for the After Earth project, where you take a fractal design that you might have created before. I have something here. I can pick any of these. Okay, this is one that I usually do. I'll create a PRT Maker, assign this design. Typically, this distribution here that you see, you can morph it into another one by going to a different frame and creating keyframes, basically loading a different design. Or you can open this editor and start changing numbers and keyframe each one in order to have an animation which changes the rules how the fractal is generated. But that doesn't give you the fluid effects that sometimes you want. So Stoke actually solves this problem. Let's just scale this system a little bit, 10 times, to be a little bit more visible. And the other thing I have to do is reduce the number of particles that are being emitted at render time to 100,000. In the viewport, we're currently showing that same number, 100,000 particles. It's very fast to create particles. It can create about 20 million per second at render time. So this object now doesn't have an ID channel, just like with the spline. In order to be able to emit only one particle for each existing particle inside of Stoke, we would have to provide an ID channel. So I can go here and say out ID. That creates the ID channel for the output, and I can say index, and that will create the input channel index. And I have here a setup which is default when you create one of those PRT makers. You get the red and the blue channel mixed. Of course, I can change those colors, or I can change the way they're blended. But they're blended thanks to a color scaler channel that is native to the PRT maker, and we'll be using it in a second to create interesting things. So that's how those colors, depending on which, that's how those colors were created, depending on which branch of the function each particle went through, it goes to a different point in space and gets a different color. That's why the colors are kind of grouped. Let me create now, I'll take this PRT maker and I'll create a Stoke out of it. And right now the PRT maker is taken as velocity, which makes little sense because it doesn't have a velocity channel. So I'm going to remove this and I'll just create a simple space warp again. I'll create a wind around the origin. Make it a spherical wind, give it a strength of 0.2, and my favorite settings for the turbulence. And I'm going to pick this wind as the driving velocity field. If I would simulate at this point, it's very important to remember that I wanted to emit only from the new particles, use new particles only. It's check for the PRT maker. That means that the AD channel will be used. And I want to emit exactly as many particles, 100,000, on the first frame, and then stop emitting. So I will check to preview the simulation and watch what is happening. And we can start seeing the particles moving. I'll stop the simulation and I'll say I want to also capture the color and this color scaler channel that we saw before that controls the color distribution. So this is the actual color that was calculated by the magma. I'll say simulate, and now you see that the particles that I'm simulating have exactly the same color as the source particles that came from the PRT maker. I can stop at this point so we don't waste time, but we see we now have an animation of that original PRT maker with exactly the same colors, but with the wind driving force, and we can use pretty much anything else to drive these particles, particle flow particles that affect them, or fume effects, and so on. Now, what happens if I wanted to actually change these colors after the fact? As we saw before, we can go, for example, and expose these parameters, expose the one color and expose the other color. And they are gamma corrected here, so they look a little bit brighter. But these colors, now that I have exposed, I can go and I can change them. For example, the one to yellow and the other one to something greenish. So these are new colors on my PRT maker, but these colors are not on my simulation. The good thing is these colors here, as we saw, are actually simulated using the color scaler, mixing two colors. So all I have to do is grab this modifier and clone it over on my simulation. And now my simulation is generating exactly the same distribution of colors. And if I go and start changing the colors, both simulations, the PRT maker and the Stoke, will be changing the color. So since we acquired channels that are necessary for that calculation, anything that you could calculate on the PRT Maker based on its own channels is now doable on our own Stoke simulation after the fact, after the simulation has finished. So it gives you more flexibility. Okay, partitioning, I'll just mention it. I already mentioned it kind of, but we have this tool which, if you open it, will let you either process the same simulation multiple times with different random seeds. All it does, it's changing this number here in each iteration, so your initial distribution will be different, and potentially the advection will have slightly different results. So if you overlay all those systems on top of each other, you get more density. Even though Stoke is very, very fast when simulating, it will be even faster to distribute this. Instead of calculating it one after the other, you can distribute the job to deadline. And if you don't have deadline, you can download deadline. It has a 2-node free mode where you don't need a license. You can install it on your home machines and submit jobs. Even in the background of your own machine, it could process them while you're sleeping. You can schedule all that stuff, and it will launch Max and calculate, save the PRTs, and continue, and so on. And if you have 10 machines, you can do 10 in parallel, which will give you all the cores of all the machines running the same simulation at the same time in the end. So that's kind of useful. And as I mentioned, this was actually written using the underlying MaxScript interface of Stoke. So you can write tools like this. You can rewrite this tool if you want, or you can change its UI, or you can change the way it calculates, or you can write a tool that runs in Backburn.